To explore the history of the planet Earth and its future, and to examine man's relation to the planet Earth and his future, the Institute of Ecotechnics invited outstanding scientists, artists of the avant-garde, explorers, and managers of our present time to a 4-day conference at their facility in the south of France. This film is the record of those shared investigations and experiences, fears and hopes, ignorance and knowledge of the mystery and patterns of planet Earth. Freed from the constraints of speaking only to colleagues of their own discipline and set in a non-media, non-governmental atmosphere, the conference explored 4.5 billion years of time from the viewpoints of the first, second, third, and fourth worlds.
Honored guests, students of the biosphere and those laws of nature sustaining and governing us all, I wish to welcome you on behalf of the Institute of Ecotechnics to the 1980 Planet Earth Conference. For 3 days we have the delight of hosting an assemblage of ladies and men, each of whom, in their individual capacities as scientist, explorer, artist, and engineer, shares the essential motivations for truth: to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. In good company and with a loyalty to life, we are making an expedition to planet Earth.
Dr. McKee points out the vast geologic changes of the 4.5 billion year history of the planet, the creation of the atmosphere, the emergence and evolution of life, the shifting of the continents, and reminds us that these geologic tectonic forces are still at work, that the planet Earth is changing and will continue to change.
Time is one of the three things that I propose to mention. A second is space. We've heard off and on for many, many years about drifting continents. This became greatly in disrepute. We merely pointed out the drifting continents. That was a curious and interesting hypothesis that some people held, meaning that we didn't really believe it. But today, we have much information about through plate tectonics and so on, and I will dwell on that subject a little bit. Thirdly, I cannot, of course, neglect in this story the evolution of life. This is an extremely important aspect and of interest to nearly all of us, and I will try to point out where most of the main groups of plants and animals make their appearance with respect to the two factors I've mentioned, time and space. and on up to the present.
Professor Hayes lifts our attention from weather fluctuations to the great climatic cycles measured in thousands of years, governed by the very change in the orbit of the planet. We are living in an unusually warm period, and Professor Hayes points out the small overall temperature changes which lead to ice age glaciation. Yet overall, despite wide fluctuations in solar radiation, organic life on the planet Earth has acted to achieve a very remarkable overall climatic constancy.
There are sort of three things that happen to the orbit, mainly due to Jupiter's influence, and that is it goes from being nearly circular to being elliptical and goes back to being nearly circular again. And it does this roughly every 100,000 years. The axes of the Earth are tilted a little bit more and a little bit less than they are now, and this happens with a period of about 42,000 years. And finally, the seasonal position of the Earth in the orbit changes with a period of on the order of 23,000 years. These orbital changes are, in fact, pacing the progression of ice ages.
Dr. Paul Ropemill reviews the exciting story of the eradication of smallpox in India, a task once considered impossible. Although smallpox had a number of characteristics which made eradication possible, global control may be more difficult for other diseases. Perhaps, as Dr. Ropemill pointed out, the most important thing to emerge is the realization of what a dedicated group of people working globally and with sufficient know-how and a sense of intention can accomplish.
The big thing about smallpox program was that we were a group of people who were obsessed about one thing: get rid of the smallpox. We showed more or less that we can be constructive on the global scale, that the thing can be done, and that we could collaborate and win across the political, racial, and religious borders. This might have been the most important lesson we learned from the program.
Dr. Robin Adams underlies that the Earth itself is an upheaval, expressing itself in faults and earthquakes, many thousands per year. Yet most of the destruction caused above ground is caused by human ignorance of this predictable activity. Architecture and human settlement could be aligned with the seismic force fields of the planet.
What is an earthquake? Basically, we seismologists think of an earthquake as the release of energy from some volume of rock in the earth. Damage is much more a function of building type than necessarily of the size of the earthquake.
surface that plants and animals have not evolved separately, but in close interaction over geologic time. Traditional tribal society was also in coevolutionary balance. But the impact of modern man and his technology is threatening large areas of the Amazon with destruction and a loss of as yet undiscovered botanic resources.
The future of the Amazon forest is not desert like some people have written. When you cut it down, it does not turn into a desert environment, but is in managed forestry. I think if we try to say, keep the whole of the Amazon forest as a reserve, we are being unrealistic. We want some areas that preserve the biological diversity of that region, and we must shoot for that. But we must also be involved as biologists in the sort of things that will be productive in this region.
Dr. Bernhard Lutsch enumerates those principles which have proved successful in evolution: conservatism, energetic efficiency, multiplicity, regional adaptation. Cultural adaptations, such as traditional architecture adapted to harsh environmental conditions, have evolved as much as animal species to their habitat. New or imported techniques often disregard the successful adaptation traditional cultural forms have developed over time.
Ecology is, in its original sense, a theory of adaptation. I call upon the young architects to learn from the master builders of the pre-industrial age for the post-industrial age, when cheap energy will no longer be available. This means making use of regional traditions as adaptations to climate, landscape, and local resources.
Points out that early man probably developed along edge biotopes like rivers, and the earliest artifacts from many cultures show large ships. Stimulated to his work by the striking similarities between cultural elements and civilizations which supposedly had no contact, Dr. Hardall has demonstrated that early civilizations had boats, balsa rafts, reed boats which could cross the oceans, that the oceans were a link and not a barrier to early civilization's spread.
Just as surprised as we have all been by learning that man is so incredibly much older on this planet than we thought a couple of decades ago, I'm quite sure that we'll get some surprise when it comes to the age of civilization also.
Baboon of them all. I'm not uptight, I don't want to fight, got no reason to fight, none at all. Oh, I'm a baboon won't join your platoon. One and all, I'll take your attack line flat on my back, or brazen myself on a wall, any wall at all, at all, at all. I'm the fleetest baboon, I'm the beatest baboon, but the neatest baboon of them all, oh, all.
Dr. Gordon Hughes reviews the historical transition from ape to man. Why did man get up on his hind legs? To greedily carry more food, or to wade into rivers keeping his head above water, or to see further, and as we still say today, to understand his situation. An objective knowledge of man's past is an important element in seeing where we are going.
There's an old theory that the earliest form of human language was gestural, and I'm convinced there's a connection between the emergence of precise tool making and tool using and speech.
William Burroughs ponders the planetary situation from an artist's standpoint, creating the mythology of the space age, the neotypes, the dream images of our subconscious. His topic is the four horsemen of the apocalypse: disease, famine, plague, and death, and the forms they assume today. We are threatened with extinction by loss of our dreams, technological power concentrated in wrong hands, and loss of our direction. Humanity is literally still in its larval state. Will it transform, go into space only to perpetuate its old-time patterns? Man has a long way to go.
Stupidity and short-sighted self-interest may well swamp spacecraft Earth before the horsemen can saddle up. The first thing that would impress a visitor from outer space would be the tremendous, inexplicable gap between potential and performance. If you look at the human artifact, what's wrong with it? Just about everything. Got a long way to go. The astronaut is not looking for space. He's looking for more time to do exactly the same thing. He's equating space with time. However, like the walking fish, looking for more time, he may find space instead, and then find that there is no way back. Now, such an evolutionary step would involve changes literally inconceivable from our present point of view of our destiny. I'm talking about biologic destiny is in space, and that our failure to achieve this is the basic flaw in the human artifact.
Dr. Alexander Reed tells of the enormous increase in man's capacity to communicate. Information can be transmitted globally at increasing speed, in increasing quantities, and at diminishing cost. While there are fears that we may be overwhelmed by all this data, discrimination methods may be built into the electronic systems themselves. The increasing network of planetary communication grids may well provide a necessary element of feedback mechanisms to avert potential catastrophes.
I personally foresee continued growth in the size, the power, and the complexity of the world communication system. I think it's already by far the largest and most complex human tool that's been created on the planet.
Dr. Ranganathan reminds us that without the creation of employment, the problems of the third world countries will not be solved. Dr. Ranganathan presents the case for coupling conservation, the wise use of natural resources, with production of forage, fuel, and food, creating jobs and upgrading the environment. Endeavors such as agroforestry will create and distribute benefits more widely than capital-intensive technological projects in the developing countries. Installing alternative energy sources. They have installed pride into their people and are an important symbol of possibilities of urban renewal led by the people themselves.
In this movie, you saw some of the people. They came from that original clique to mobilize ourselves into a very strong community movement, you know, and we've been working at it. And you have to realize, you know, there's this species that's being experimented by ourselves, because we are part of the problem, you know, and we also part of the solution.
Será un dulce racimo, quien del mar de las uvas, nuestro vino.
Professor Adriano Buzzati Traverso outlines the major parameters of the global problematique. The problem is worldwide. Change in the environment is happening at an accelerating rate, and little accurate data is available to even evaluate the situation. He is heading a project designed to scan our changing planet, coordinating with existing research efforts to establish critically needed monitoring of vital areas.
My hope is that out of this study, 5 or more years from now, we may identify homeostatic mechanisms of the biosphere, which we do not know anything about today, which may prevent the destruction of our world.
Dr. Alexander King sounds a note of warning. Population increase concentrated in enormous cities, increase in unemployment, destruction of natural environment, and increasing disparity between rich and poor countries is leading to a catastrophe. The problems are exacerbated by human factors of ignorance, militarism, and greed. Unless it is possible to awaken man's enlightened self-interest in his viable future, present trends will continue. We will either decide on limits to growth and enjoy abundance, or overpopulate and impoverish both ourselves and the planet.
We can classify the limits to human advancement as 3. There are the well-known outer limits, the capacity of the environment to absorb the waste products of industry and humanity, the question of the limits of energy, the limits of materials, and so on. Secondly, we have the inner limits, which are sociological, political. And thirdly, I would say the innermost limits within the nature of man himself, our self-limitations and the limitations of our capacity as provided by evolution.
Gun now for the planetary war.
Wild boy, build us a bomb.
Needed now as never before.
Wild boy, build us a bomb.
Give me everything I could ever dream.
Okay, wild boy, build us a bomb.
Give all scientists, put them on my team.
Okay, wild boy, build us a bomb.
Gonna unlock secrets of universal death.
Okay, wild boy, build us a bomb.
Gonna make God himself hold his breath.
Okay, wild boy, build us a bomb.
And me, I'm gonna be boss. Call all the shots.
Alright, wild boy, build us a bomb.
Putting an end to all the old plots.
See about that? Build us a bomb. Build us a bomb. Ooh, build us a
Gun
bomb.
now for the planetary war.
Build us a
Needed
bomb.
now as
Build
never
us a
before.
bomb.
Give me
Build us a
everything
bomb.
I could
Build
ever
us a
dream.
bomb. Build
Give
us
all
a
the
bomb.
scientists,
Build
put
us
them
a
on my
bomb.
team. Gonna
Build us a
unlock
bomb.
secrets
Ooh,
of
build us a
universal
bomb.
death. Gonna make
Build us
God
a bomb.
himself
Ooh,
hold
build us
his
a
breath.
bomb.
Me,
Build
I'm
us
gonna
a
be
bomb.
boss. Call
Build us
all
a
the
bomb.
shots.
Build us
Putting
a
an
bomb.
end to all the
Build us
old
a
plots.
Build
Going to
us a
unlock
bomb,
the
bomb.
secret of
Build
universal
us a bomb,
death.
bomb.
Gonna make
Build,
God
build,
himself,
build,
God himself,
build,
God himself.
build, build,
Ooh,
build,
that
build us a
breath.
bomb, bomb.
Eight, seven, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Dr. Hosin reminds the conference of the political realities, that science and technology are used by the superpowers for prestige, economic advantage, and above all, war. The resources of the planet are going at a dangerous rate into military production which threatens us all. The objective findings of the scientific technological revolution will either be integrated, creating a new political understanding and will, or all our efforts will be useless.
Humanity spent during 1980 $500 billion for arms. The amount of money spent on means of destruction. Just think about the thing. It's 20 Apollo programs. 20 Apollo programs in 1 year transformed into armaments. So this is the, as we call, lost chance for the humanity to use them for constructive purpose.
Professor Mark Nelson presents the Institute of Ecotechnics' conceptual model to study the planet through an evaluation of its many ecological regions. Expanding the usual limits of ecological thinking to include cultural forces and the decision-making populations into the equation, the model seeks to gain a holistic view of the total ecosystem operating in the ecoregion. Coupling this with an evaluation of the disorder and inefficiency, the entropic and anti-entropic forces present, and the relation of ecoregions to each other, the planet can be studied. This data would serve as feedback to managers and decision-makers operating within the ecoregions to evaluate their own decisions and actions.
I will be presenting a conceptual model that the Institute of Ecotechnics has been working on and has indeed begun to use in its Centers for Regional Ecology. And inevitably, I'll be drawing most largely on agronomic examples and on examples from the two research stations that I've worked most closely with. One of the greatest needs on the planet Earth is the science of management. first choice is, what are you going to pay attention to? And what we'd like to propose as the fundamental unit of the diversity of the planet Earth is what we have termed ecoregions. So the first step in the model is to identify the ecoregion. But there's something that holds it together, and usually these ecoregions are not hidden. People involved in an area usually perceive that they are in that area. In fact, one will notice coming into an area afresh, there is always a certain polarity between what are called the old-timers who know that we are in this region. There's a certain adaptation, there's a certain style, there's a certain culture, there's a certain architecture which works, and the integration of new members to where those adaptations are in fact carried out. And in fact, one can look at ecoregions in terms of what sort of stability they have over time. What we're proposing would be that the aim of management would be to increase the potential of a system of an ecoregion to do work, i.e. to increase its free energy, delta F, and decrease the waste, inefficiency, entropy that that system produces.
Eddie McKee introduced us to the grand themes of Earth history, time, space, and life, and established the ever-changing conditions of this long-lived and complex home of ours. Jim Hayes worked us back from our concern with the daily weather to the great cycles of climate, changes in the atmosphere itself, introducing us to the second great force operating on the planet Earth, the sun, as complement to the tectonic forces of the geologist. And once again we found life establishing itself in relation to the changing energy of the sun itself. Dr. Rothmill pointed out that disease has also evolved with life on this planet, and that in addition to creative forces, there are forces dogging the steps of every species. Dr. Adams introduced us to the forces operating from the center of the planet and the necessity for architecture to align itself with planetary forces. Dr. Prance introduced us to the interplay of the plant and animal world and their interplay in coevolution, closing with the question mark of man. Dr. Loach then pointed out that we can take advantage of this immense evolutionary experience in modeling our cultural innovations on the literal wisdom of the ages. Thor Heyerdahl demonstrated to us the courage and vision necessary to undertake explorations in that perhaps most dangerous of all regions, human history, and the origins of the ecumen. Gordon Hughes reviewed the history of culture, the extraordinary story of evolving, walking and talking to the development of the incipient world history of 1500 AD. William Burroughs presented, as artists do, an image, ambiguous, troubling, for dreaming without which our subconscious reservoir for our creativity would dry up and our future with it. Alex Reed took us on a voyage of technical possibles in creating the first planetary social brain. Mr. Ranganathan introduced us to the stark quantitative problems of the third world and the fundamental thinking and action required to deal with it. Gino Garcia showed us the people themselves in action, that people are no longer willing to remain passive spectators to their manipulation. Professor Bazzati Traverso indicated the vast scope and complexity of data collection needed to keep up with ongoing changes. And Alexander King pointed out the collision course with disaster that we are headed toward with population and energy, the double-edged opportunity risk of new technology, and the necessity of deeply considering man's inner limits and working realistically with his self-interest. And Dr. Khozin showed us that to accomplish its knowledge, scientists must incorporate their work into the fabric of their society. My friends, the Institute of Ecotechnics salutes your work. We pledge to assist in any way possible to us its realization. One great truth has at least emerged. We're all in it together. And it's a terrifying and splendid challenge. Let us succeed.
They have equity. Develop equity. Equity 7 What equity is, if you don't have knowledge, you have to do questions. That's a question. And this building was developed. You are in contact. You have okay. Coming back. People keep on the rock. And the little boat, round boat is floating up and down like that. And a wonderful time.